Haiwen-ho hoard. In 2015, while excavating a cemetery in Jiangxi province in China, archaeologists unearthed an incredible discovery. They found 187 large gold coins from an aristocrat's tomb inside 2 boxes belonging to the grave of Haiwen-ho, or the Marquis of Haiwen. The coins went far beyond the team's expectations. They also found 25 hoof-shaped gold ingots. The grave also contained several jade artifacts, including a pendant decorated with dragon and phoenix patterns, as well as bronze objects. Archaeologists were fascinated by the jade items, which they said represent the Han Dynasty's highest quality craftsmanship. These were just some of the 10,000 artifacts that were eventually found within the tomb. The treasures make up the largest and best-preserved collection of gold items ever found in a Han Dynasty burial. One coin weighed in at 250 grams, putting its estimated value at $8,611 based on market prices at the time of the discovery. The Marquis of Haiwen's tomb dates back to sometime between 206 BC and 24 AD, during the Western Han Dynasty, and it's the best-preserved burial from the era ever found. Ancient Magician's Curse. In Jerusalem, archaeologists discovered a lead tablet dating back 1,700 years. The tablet is kind of horrifying for one simple fact. A curse was written on it by a magician. Yes, a very real, ancient magician. The tablet was discovered inside a Roman mansion being excavated by the Israel Antiquities Authority beneath a parking lot of all places. It was discovered in a part of Jerusalem called the City of David, an area with over 6,000 years of continuous human occupation. The mansion was in use sometime around the year 363 AD, just before it was destroyed by an earthquake. As for the text on the tablet, it was written in Greek. The inscription says that a woman named Kirilla invoked the names of 6 gods so that she could cast an evil curse on a man named Lenis, apparently over some kind of legal matter. The text says something similar to, "I strike down and nail down the tongue and the eyes of the opposition of Lenis." Basically, Kirilla was asking the gods to make sure that this person could in no way be an adversary. She wanted him to lose whatever legal battle the two were having. What's truly amazing is that this magician combined elements from at least 4 different religions to complete the curse. She used gods including Hermes, Persephone, Hecate, and Hades. One god is from Babylon, one is a Gnostic god, and the others are Greek. Overkill? I think so. A hoard of mummies. Authorities in Egypt recently announced the astounding discovery of an extremely well-preserved mummy from over 3,000 years ago. This mummy is fascinating for a few reasons. First of all, it's rare that a sarcophagus is opened in 2021 with a mummy still inside. Second, it was the first time that authorities opened a sarcophagus on live international TV. The mummy inside the coffin belonged to a woman who lived in what is today Luxor, sometime during the 18th dynasty. The 18th dynasty of Egypt was in the 13th century BC and was one of the most important periods. This was the dynasty that boasted some of the most famous pharaohs in history, such as Tutankhamun and Ramses II. We don't know who exactly this woman was in her life, but she was important enough to be buried in a secret tomb deep underground in the necropolis at El Asasif on the western bank of the Nile. Besides the woman's mummy in her sarcophagus, archaeologists also uncovered the tomb of the overseer, the very man who would have overseen all mummification at the necropolis. This tomb contained all kinds of interesting artifacts, including colorful masks and over 1,000 tiny statues called ushapti. These statues were miniature figurines of servants, which were supposed to serve the deceased once they moved into the afterlife. The tomb also contained mummified remains of people from 4,000 years ago without any coffins, just slumped in a carved cave with no accompaniments. The reason for their lack of care or preparation is not yet known. Ancient baby armor. In Russia, archaeologists discovered the grave of an infant from 4,500 years ago. Found inside the grave were small figurines, which scientists say could be ancient baby rattles that were used not only as toys, but also as charms to keep away evil spirits. The incredible discovery was made near the shores of Lake Itkul by researchers with the Russian Academy of Sciences. The infant was buried in a birch bark cradle and was no older than a year at its time of death.
It had 8 small horned figurines placed on its chest. These figurines were carved in the likeness of human characters and to look like the heads of animals such as elk, birds, and creatures scientists have been unable to identify. The figurines were carved from deer antlers, found with internal cavities that probably would have been used to produce a rattling sound by inserting small pebbles. However, archaeologists can't be 100% sure. These toys are ancient and they may not have even been toys at all. They could have been buried with the deceased child to ensure a safe passage into the next world. But there is something even rarer about this burial. The infant was found with a unique piece of baby armor. It was wearing headgear made from 11 copper plates, with the appearance of an extremely elaborate copper helmet. It was at one point tied securely onto the baby's skull with leather laces. But the big mystery here is that researchers can't seem to figure out why the baby was given a helmet, as this just isn't something archaeologists are used to finding. Whatever the purpose of the helmet, all of these details in this infant grave make for an incredible and rare discovery.
Black Swan Project. In 2007, a company called Odyssey Marine Exploration flew $500 million worth of treasure from Gibraltar to its headquarters in Florida. It refused to reveal the origins of the cryptic hoard, which included 17 tons of mostly silver coins. The company did admit that the coins were mostly from one particular shipwreck, but that there were coins from other wrecks thrown into the mix. Most of the currency is likely uncirculated, according to rare coin expert Nick Breuer, who examined several thousand of the coins. It was later revealed that Odyssey filed court paperwork for rights to salvage the wreck of the Nuestra Señora de las Mercedes, a Spanish warship that sank off the Portuguese coast in 1804. Naturally, the Spanish government fought the case and claimed ownership. Because some of the coins were minted in Lima, the Peruvian government also claimed dibs on the treasure.
The court ultimately ruled that the hoard rightfully belongs to Spain, and Odyssey was ordered to turn over the treasure and to pay over $1 million to the Spanish government for bad faith and abusive litigation. The Ringed Lady of Herculaneum. Of course, you've heard of Pompeii, the ancient Roman city that was wiped out by a catastrophic volcanic eruption in 79 AD. But it wasn't the only city that was destroyed by Mount Vesuvius. The nearby city of Herculaneum was also completely destroyed, but the experience itself was much different. While it was much closer to the volcano than Pompeii was, Herculaneum avoided being rained on by debris for nearly a day after the eruption began. Residents had time to see what was happening and analyze the situation. They weren't vaporized in an instant, and so they had some time to plan their next move. Archaeologists initially found very few human remains at Herculaneum, so they assumed that most people escaped the disaster. Yet, as it turned out, they were wrong. In 1982, a team discovered piles of skeletons along the town's beach and in a series of vaulted chambers, and they believe that there may be even more bodies waiting to be discovered. But if the people of Herculaneum had any opportunity to escape, why didn't they? During the eruption's second phase, the volcanic cloud it created collapsed, resulting in deadly pyroclastic surges, the first of which spewed forth at 100 feet per second. Anyone who wasn't gone from the town by then had little to no chance to leave, and they were either vaporized or buried. One of the most iconic individuals discovered at Herculaneum is the Ringed Lady. Also called the Lady of the Rings, she became famous for the elegant jewelry she was wearing when the eruption killed her. She was one of the first skeletons to make the news after the discoveries, and she remains fresh in people's minds today. Like many of the individuals found at Pompeii and Herculaneum, she serves as a sobering reminder of the trauma many people experienced firsthand during their final moments in the deadly shadow of Mount Vesuvius. Bodies at German Stonehenge. There is a German version of Stonehenge, a circular henge built in the Neolithic period around the year 2320 BC. This was just about 200 years after Stonehenge in England was put together by a different tribe of Neolithic people. The henge in Germany can still be seen today near the small town of Pamelta, just as impressive as the one in England, but not quite as famous. It also wasn't built out of stones, but rather with wood. In addition, it also features several different rings and a bunch of mysterious pits. According to archaeologists, the German Stonehenge was used as a gathering place for the local communities, a place where they would perform rituals. One of these rituals very well may have been human sacrifice, specifically the sacrifice of young children and women. We know this because scientists have uncovered the skeletons of both women and children inside the mysterious pits surrounding the monument. Archaeologists also found cattle bones, fragments of drinking vessels, and other materials often associated with Neolithic rituals. So far, at least 7 bodies have been found buried with ritualistic paraphernalia. And here's where things get really disturbing. Archaeologists have also uncovered random limbs, including severed arms, legs, and heads. Almost all the children were between the ages of 3 and 17, with the women being over 40. But unfortunately, we still have no idea how or why these particular people were slaughtered and dismembered. Bronze Age axe. A teenager in England made the discovery of a lifetime on her 3rd day using a metal detector to search for artifacts. Her name is Millie Hardwick, just 13 years old. She discovered a treasure hoard of items from over 3,000 years before today. One item in particular proved to be exceptionally valuable, an old Bronze Age-era axe that may have been used by warriors in battle. But Millie wasn't alone in her excavating. She had gone out into the field with her father and grandfather on a Sunday morning. They had been using their metal detectors for several hours, but hadn't had much luck. They took a lunch break, had some cookies and sandwiches, and then attempted a different area of the field. After about 20 minutes, Millie came across the axe, and from there, things really spiraled. All 3 of the amateur archaeologists were digging out axe heads, ingots, blade fragments of bronze, and all kinds of amazing things. By the end of the day, they had uncovered at least 65 items from the Bronze Age. For those who don't know, the Bronze Age lasted in Britain from between 2300 BC to 800 BC. Some people refer to this as prehistoric England, the time before there were any written records. To put this into perspective, Stonehenge was built 700 years before the Bronze Age during the Copper Age. The Copper Age was the period of transition between the Age of Stone and the time of Bronze. What do you think about metal detecting with your family? I've never done it, but it seems really fun. A medieval knight. The skeleton of a medieval knight has been discovered in Scotland. And while that itself may not be very rare, this particular skeleton was found on the site of tournament grounds from the Middle Ages. And even more, archaeologists believe they know who the knight is that was buried here. They believe the grave site, marked by a huge sandstone slab and a carving of the cavalry cross, belongs to Robert Morley. Historical records tell us that Robert was a nobleman who died during a tournament in the year 1388. By investigating his remains, experts were able to determine that the man was heavily muscled at his time of death, and that he had died in his mid-20s. They also discovered healed injuries sustained from earlier fighting tournaments. Robert had already recovered from an axe wound to the head and an arrow to the chest. He met his end, however, in his final tournament, when a sword sliced through his nose and cut into his jaw. An unfortunate way to go. The tournament took place in the city of Edinburgh. The local culture council says this newest discovery is one of the most significant the city has made in years, as it should help to show what life was truly like in medieval Edinburgh. You know, before the tournament ground was converted into a high school for royals in the 16th century. Treasure in Bulgaria. Back in 1949, 3 brothers named Pavel, Petko, and Mikhail Dakov were working together at a tile factory in Bulgaria when they unearthed what they mistakenly thought were some brass instruments from the Roman gypsy culture. They were digging clay when they stumbled upon the collection of 9 objects with no awareness that they had just found actual treasure. An expert reported to the scene and identified, much to the brothers' surprise, that they had uncovered 24-karat gold Thracian artifacts dating back to the 4th or 3rd century BC. Scholars believe that the items are a ceremonial set belonging to King Sufis III. The vessels are decorated with scenes from Thracian myths and culture. 4 of the pieces are rhytons, or ceremonial cups, shaped like the heads of animals and women. 2 resemble deer, and 1 takes the form of a ram's head. They represent some of the best preserved Thracian artifacts ever discovered, as well as some of the most valuable, with a combined weight of 13.4 pounds of gold. This collection is one of the best surviving artifacts of Thracian culture. A new dinosaur species. Scientists in Missouri recently announced the discovery of a new dinosaur species and genus. Dubbed Parasaurus missouriensis, the creature was identified based on the skeleton of a juvenile found by paleontologist Guy Darrow. P. missouriensis was a duck-billed dinosaur that grew up to 35 feet long by adulthood. The recently unearthed specimen was roughly the size of a Volkswagen, according to Darrow, who has been working at the site for 40 years. Sea levels were much higher when the creature roamed the Earth around 70 million years ago. At the time, North America was divided by a body of water called the Western Interior Seaway. While a wealth of fossils have been found along what was once the former sea's western shore, the Missouri fossil site represents one of the few that would have been along the eastern shore. Kind of a west shore versus east shore situation. Pete Makovicki, curator of dinosaurs at Chicago's Field Museum, has explored dinosaur fossil sites all over the world. He described the Missouri property as one of the most unique he's ever seen. Researchers are now keeping the location a secret for now, while they work to secure the site, because they don't want anyone stealing their dino bones. They could be worth millions. Makovicki said that he believes there are more dinosaur fossils in the area waiting to be found. Given this new species discovery, it's possible there may be other undiscovered dinosaurs yet to be found in the area. Ancient bear skeleton. An ancient bear skeleton was unearthed in the central province of Henan in China. Scientists believe, based on the size of its skull and the shape of its teeth, that the skeleton belonged to a black bear. It lived 2,800 years ago. And even though the skeleton of the bear is a little creepy, the really fascinating part is that it could prove that Chinese people were taming bears almost 3,000 years before today. I'm not saying the Chinese were walking around with bears on leashes. That's probably not what was going on. But archaeologist Ma Xiaolin does say that the Chinese were definitely trying to raise bears in captivity. When they did an analysis of the bear's left leg, they found it was shorter than the right leg. They wanted to find out why. After x-raying the bone, they found that the bear had suffered a fracture when it was a cub. In the wild, this kind of injury would mean certain death. But if the bear had been captured by humans and partly domesticated, it would have been able to grow to be an adult. And since it was at least 5 years old when it died, this has to be the case. We don't know what ancient Chinese people were doing with their bears. This one was found in a sacrificial pit that was used during the Western Zhou dynasty from between the 11th century to 771 BC. But other than just keeping them for pets and eventual sacrifices, we really don't know what the Chinese wanted with tame bears. Ancient cities. Archaeologists have been making some absolutely fascinating discoveries recently in Iraq. Excavation missions all across the country are putting together a puzzle of ancient Iraq unlike anything seen before. A British museum excavation recently found a mosque built entirely of mud that dates back to the Umayyad period, 1,400 years ago. Not only that, the lost temple of King Gudea was found, the most famous Sumerian king that ruled during the Lagash dynasty. This guy ruled all of southern Mesopotamia between 2124 and 2144 BC, with one of his greatest works being the Temple of Ningirsu at Lagash, in honor of his people's patron god. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. In addition to these incredible discoveries, a French mission excavating near the city of Larsa found the palace of King Sin-Ednam from 1850 to 1844 BC. King Sin-Ednam ruled back when Iraq was ancient Babylonia. The temple was found to contain 10 rooms and a heap of administrative complexes that the king would have ruled from. But by far one of the greatest archaeological achievements in Iraq of the last year was when a British mission helped to restore the oldest bridge in the entire world. It's located in the city of Girsu and dates back 4,000 years. Iraq truly has been busy revealing its incredible archaeological marvels. Aside from all the previously mentioned, there was the British and German team that discovered the city of Charax, built by Alexander the Great himself. They didn't excavate it, but they found it using radar surveys. According to the Director of Antiquities and Heritage in Basra, Charax is the biggest city that was ever built by Alexander. All in all, Pretty amazing. Ancient Korean love letter. Inside the tomb of a Korean mummy, archaeologists came across an extraordinarily rare love letter. The love letter was written by a pregnant woman for her deceased husband, Huang Tae. When experts discovered his mummified body in a tomb in Andong City in South Korea, he had 13 letters stacked on his coffin. One of the letters, the most compelling by far, says, "My feelings towards you I cannot forget in this world, and my sorrow knows no limit." And that's just a piece of it. The letter goes on and on and on. The woman was absolutely distraught, especially because her baby would have to grow up without a father. She even beseeched the dead man to read her letter and visit her in her dreams. The letter dates back to the year 1568, or about 445 years ago. And although we don't know the woman's name, experts in Korean history believe her husband was part of the Go-seong-yi clan. They also say he was probably quite handsome when alive, as he was discovered to be significantly taller than most men in Korea at that time. Sekwon Yim from the Andong National University Museum, one of the first people to actually see the mummy, said his dark mustache probably gave him a charming appearance.
San Jose shipwreck. The Spanish galleon, the San Jose, was laden with gold, silver, and emeralds when it sunk off the coast of Cartagena, Colombia in 1708. It was sailing as part of the Spanish treasure fleet when the ships crossed paths with a British squadron. The encounter erupted into what became known as Wager's Action. San Jose's powder magazines exploded during the skirmish, causing the galleon to sink with most of its crew and all of its treasure still on board. Only 11 people survived the harrowing ordeal. Nobody knows what exactly caused the explosion, but some experts speculate that the ship's captain shot them because having the treasure plunged to the sea floor was better than letting it fall into British hands. The wreck remained missing for centuries as treasure hunters scrambled to locate it in hopes of cashing in on a huge fortune. Based on the cargo that reportedly went down with the San Jose, the goods are estimated to be worth upwards of a whopping $14 billion in modern currency. When the Sea Search Armada, or the SSA expedition funded by U.S. investors, claimed to have found the wreck in 1981, the Colombian government was quick to establish a new law giving itself rights to the treasure. Authorities refused to let the discoverers excavate the site, and they retaliated by suing. Long story short, the wreck was declared property of the Colombian state. The country's navy rediscovered the submerged ship in 2015, and the custody battle ensued, this time with Spain trying to lay claim to some of the goods. The indigenous Cara people of modern-day Bolivia, whose land the treasures were extracted from, have also expressed an interest in collecting in on the fortune. Sea Search Armada is also still fighting for its piece of the pie, and the case currently lies in the hands of the Colombian Supreme Court.
Russian silver hoard. When people in southwestern Russia caught word of an impending Mongol invasion in 1237, they buried their treasure in secret hiding spots with plans to retrieve their valuables later on. But not everyone ended up coming back to the burial sites, and modern archaeologists have unearthed several of the hoards. But a recently discovered collection of over 24 pieces of silver jewelry stood out as different from the rest. The hoard consists of over 5 pounds of silver, including 14 bracelets, 5 rings, 4 silver ingots, and more. Based on their style, the items appear to date back to the late 11th or early 12th century. There were no nearby settlements at the time, but the jewelry was found near a road that led to a major trading hub called Old Ryazan. It probably belonged to either a merchant or a thief, according to archaeologist Igor Strikalov, and could have bought at least 10 war horses or 200 sheep. That's quite a stash. Strikalov says that the hoard's owner may have buried it out of fear, and that the fears were justified. He could not return for the treasure since he probably died soon after. The cannabis skeleton. Archaeologists recently discovered one of the largest collections of ancient marijuana ever. The weed was found in the grave of a man who died 2,500 years ago. This man had Caucasian features, and he was laid to rest on a wooden bed and given pillows of reeds. He was also buried in a shroud of weed with a series of 13 cannabis plants laid over his chest. This guy was literally buried in a marijuana blanket. But this doesn't mean he was a prehistoric stoner. Instead, he was probably some kind of magic man. He probably used cannabis either ritualistically or medicinally. He was discovered buried by a team of researchers from the Chinese Academy of Sciences in the Turpan region, located in the extreme north of China by the border of Mongolia. It's believed he was a member of the Gushi Kingdom, a group of people that thrived from between 3,000 and 2,000 years ago. They played a large role as traders on the Silk Road before they vanished. And apparently they were pretty heavy into the grass. Did you know that ancient medicine frequently made use of cannabis? Let me know in the comments below. Lost Hellenistic Fortress. Archaeologists in Israel have unveiled a historic fortress built by Hellenistic powers and then destroyed by a force of Jewish rebels in 112 BC. Archaeologists are saying that the Hasmonean ruler, John Hyrcanus I, razed the fortified structure as he conquered Idumea. Even more, the discovery of this destroyed fortress could very well prove the origin of the Jewish celebration of Hanukkah. In Jewish lore, the tradition of Hanukkah dates back to the Maccabean Revolt, which went down from between 167 to 160 BC. Jewish rebels recaptured the Temple of Jerusalem, defeating the Hellenistic forces. They then lit an oil lamp inside the temple that was supposed to have only had enough oil to last for a day, but instead lasted for 8. This newly discovered fortress was actually burned to the ground by the nephew of the rebel leader Judah Maccabee. Archaeologists found charred wooden beams, rusted weapons, and coins from what was once a heavily manned fort. When it was still standing, the stone walls of the structure would have measured over 10 feet thick. And while it doesn't technically prove that the story of Hanukkah is real, it does offer tangible evidence that something like it did happen. The fortress proves that the Hellenistic army did indeed have a line of fortifications, and that the Jewish revolt succeeded in burning that line to the ground. The earliest matches. In a very rare and one-of-a-kind discovery, researchers from Israel believe they have found the very first matches ever made. Not matches like you or I know them today, but rather fire starters that Neolithic people used 8,000 years ago to start fires at their leisure. This is something we take for granted today, but being able to start fire on a whim was something that dramatically changed the course of human history. It's what brought us out of the caves and into the light. According to Professor Naama Goren-Inbar from Hebrew University of Jerusalem, scientists have found plenty of evidence of fire going back millions of years. But this is usually just from leftover fires, things like charcoal in the ground and ancient ashes mixed with the sediment. This is the first time actual evidence of how these people ignited their fires has been found. It wasn't a match that you would strike on the ground, but a cylinder that was rotated at high speed to generate enough friction to ignite tinder. The match would have been spun inside a socket on a fireboard. When done by someone who knew what they were doing, this would have created enough heat for flame in just a few seconds. In the end, it was really just a fancy way of rubbing two sticks together. But for our ancient ancestors, these portable matches were probably as invaluable as your smartphone is today. The Sroda Treasure. While demolishing a building back in 1985, workers in Sroda, Poland found a vase filled with 3,000 14th century silver coins. They unearthed even more coins in the building next door, along with gold Florentine coins called florin. Locals flocked to the landfill containing the building debris and discovered more treasures, including a gold crown that likely belonged to Emperor Charles IV's wife, Blanche of Valois. They also found 12th and 13th century gold pendants, a sapphire ring, and a gold clasp containing precious stones. The items are worth an estimated $120 million. Scholars believe that Emperor Charles IV pawned the items to raise money to back his claim that he was the true king of the Romans. Soon after that, the plague struck Poland, and the banker in possession of the hoard either fled, got sick and died, or was persecuted for his religion, as Jews were commonly and wrongfully blamed for the disease. Poland's National Museum owns most of the treasures now, but it's possible that there are some stray items that remain undiscovered or in unidentified hands. Have you ever found any treasure by accident? Let me know in the comments below. Saqqara Sodo monoliths. There are around 10,000 monoliths at Saqqara Sodo and several other archaeological sites throughout southern Ethiopia, with some standing as high as 20 feet tall. They are found in what's known as the Judeo Zone, which contains the largest number and highest concentration of megalithic steel monuments in Africa. These incredible monoliths vary in size, function, and arrangement. Many are shaped like a phallus. Some are plain, while others bear intricate faces or anthropomorphic designs. They haven't been studied much, and nobody knows how or why they were built. During the 1990s, French scientists concluded that the monuments date back to sometime around 1100 AD. But they were wrong, according to a recent study, which found that the monoliths are roughly 1,000 years older than scientists previously thought. After re-examining them, a team of researchers from Washington State University determined that they were likely built during the 1st century AD. They also found that most of the obsidian artifacts at Sakaro Sodo were created with rock sourced from 186 miles away in northern Kenya. Sadly, many of the monuments have fallen down or broken into pieces. They are currently under consideration as a prospective UNESCO World Heritage Site, which would afford them the protection they need to prevent time and the elements from destroying them completely. And now for a mysterious city that kept burning down. But first, want to give a big shout out to Jennifer Ballesteri and Austin Brown, who is a new subscriber. Welcome! If you want to see more videos about amazing and mysterious discoveries, be sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification bell for more videos like these. Mexican makeovers. For the pre-Hispanic civilizations that lived in what is now Mexico, death was not the end of being beautiful. A new study has found that the ancient residents of Teotihuacan exhumed dead people from their graves and then painted them with cosmetic makeup during rituals of remembrance. In case you don't remember, Teotihuacan is the abandoned ancient city near modern Mexico City. It's filled with temples and pyramids. It was occupied before the Aztecs showed up, and it's full of mystery. One of these mysteries is that archaeologists found pots of cosmetic pigments here, which they've been able to directly link to death practices. The pots of pigment were made sometime around 200 AD, or about 1800 years ago. Back then, dead people were normally buried underneath the floors of their own houses. Sometime after they were buried, a high priest would come around to do a kind of last rites ceremony. They would dig up the body and then give the corpse a makeover. We don't know why this happened. Archaeologists guess it could have something to do with the economy. Since a lot of the pigments came from nearby mines, it probably promoted trade between miners, marketplace people, and the priests. We also know that only noble people received the post-death makeover, so it was probably quite an expensive affair. Giant Atlas statue. A huge statue of Atlas, buried for centuries, has been discovered in Sicily. This statue measures 24 feet tall. It was built during the 5th century BC to stand guard at the entrance of the Temple of Zeus. Now, for those of you who aren't up to date on your Greek mythology, Atlas was a titan punished by Zeus to bear the entire weight of the sky on his shoulders. For this reason, it's no surprise that the statue is so big. But according to archaeologists, it was only one of almost 40 that stood around the ancient building. None of them are standing today. And this one, which is in surprisingly good condition, was buried with the ruins of the temple for thousands of years. The temple was actually so huge that archaeologists don't think it was ever fully completed. If you're curious as to why a temple dedicated to Zeus was found in Sicily, it's because the ancient Greeks had population centers all across the region. It's actually located in Sicily's Valley of the Temples. It was part of the ancient city of Acragas, founded over 2,600 years ago.
Christ Mocked. An extremely rare and valuable painting by the 13th century artist Cimabue hung inconspicuously on the wall of an elderly woman's home in France for years before it was discovered. It wasn't until the house was being cleared out for auction in 2019 that an auctioneer named Philomene Wolf noticed the valuable Renaissance work. Known as Christ Mocked, the painting depicts the mocking that Jesus Christ endured in the hours leading up to his crucifixion. And thankfully, it was found in excellent condition, despite being hung above a hot plate in the kitchen of the home. At first glance, the artwork is nothing special. Measuring just 7.9 by 9.4 inches, it's rather small. But thanks to Wolf's keen eye for masterpieces, it was just narrowly spared from going to the dump. She estimated the painting's value at somewhere between $360,000 and $480,000, but recommended consulting a specialist. And as it turned out, Wolf's estimate was quite low. The piece sold at auction for an astounding $26.6 million to a group of US-based Chilean collectors who specialize in Italian masterpieces. But the French government was eager to get its hands on the painting and blocked it from being exported under the condition that the country has 30 months to raise enough money to buy it. Whether this will happen remains to be seen.
Burnt City figurines. Archaeologists in southwestern Iran's Burnt City recently announced the discovery of numerous human and animal figurines. Formerly known as Shar-e-Sukta, the ancient metropolis dates back roughly 5,000 years. From its founding in 3200 BC to its final downfall in 1800 BC, it was home to 4 different civilizations, all of which burned down in catastrophic fires. Incredible coincidence? Possibly, but it does explain why the spot is known as the Burnt City. For some reason, every time the city burned down, a new one was built in its place. But what kept people coming back and rebuilding? The mysterious area was very popular, with various Bronze Age trade routes passing through. Within the remains of the burnt city itself were the figurines. They consist of cows and other animals, as well as sitting women and standing men, according to archaeologist Hossein Moradi. Additionally, the team unearthed a kiln, but they don't yet know whether it was used for firing pottery, smelting metal, or for something else. Perhaps even more interesting, they found the remains of a prehistoric monkey, which they believe was kept as a pet. The animal's owner buried it inside its cage. Based on the burnt city's trading connections, researchers believe that the monkey was imported from northern India or Central Asia. Only 4 to 5% of the burnt city has been excavated so far. Investigating is both time-consuming and expensive, and each digging season only lasts 60 days. The archaeology team recently began its 19th season in a residential part of the site. Their goal is to reach areas with artifacts left behind from the first period of occupation, which they have found the least evidence of throughout the ongoing excavations. Tablet to the god Maglus. In the early 2000s, a team of over 60 archaeologists from the University of Leicester were working on a handful of sites in the city, doing excavations and other archaeological research. It was during one of these excavations that an ancient tablet was discovered dedicated to the god Maglus. A specialist from Oxford University was called in to translate what was inscribed on the sheet of lead, crafted either in the 2nd or 3rd century AD. It turned out that someone was extremely angry that they had been robbed. The inscription was a request to the god Maglus to punish the wrongdoer who stole his cloak. Someone had stolen this guy's jacket, and he was wildly upset. He asked Maglus to destroy the thief post-haste, then gave him a list of 19 suspects that could have been involved with the thievery. What's crazy about this is that nobody knows who Maglus is. If this was a god from 2,000 years ago, nobody today has ever heard of him. But if the god's name was being invoked for revenge, he must have been one seriously bad deity. And now for possibly the world's largest sacrifice. But first, I want to say a big thank you to Stax the Ripper and Blue Devil YT and Mom. Hi guys, and thanks so much for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, because we have lots more videos like these coming up. Last fugitive of Mount Vesuvius. Archaeologists recently completed the first excavation of the Roman town of Herculaneum since the 1980s. During the excavation, they discovered the skeleton and the personal belongings of someone they're calling the last fugitive. This person died when Mount Vesuvius erupted in the year 79 AD. He was found on the beach near the town, with his skeletal remains blackened and his bones cracked from heat-induced fractures. He was holding a cloth shoulder bag under his left arm, which scientists were able to analyze. It contained several different objects, including something made of metal, some pieces of cloth, and traces of gold. This is the definition of an ancient mystery. Archaeologists have been working backward to try and figure out what exactly happened to this guy. The evidence suggests that he was at the seashore when the volcano erupted, or he had been blasted there from the force of the eruption. The incredible temperature from the eruption caused his tissue to instantly vaporize. Then his skeleton was trapped in a massive ash and debris. They've called him the last fugitive because he appears to have been fleeing the rioting volcano with his most precious belongings tucked under his arm when the explosion turned him into an instant mummy. And on that note, it's time for a shout-out! Big thank you to Zoe Scurro and Harold Finbird. Thanks so much for watching and hope you're feeling better. If you are new here, welcome, and be sure to hit that subscribe button before you go. We've got lots more videos coming up. The Lindo Man. The Lindo Man is an exceptional bog body, one of the best ever found. He was discovered in a peat bog at Lindo Moss in the north of England back in 1984. Commercial peat cutters were out working when suddenly there was a mummy looking back at them from the muck. This came the year after the Lindo woman was found in the same area, as well as some assorted body parts of unknown origin that were found between the two. At the time, the Lindo Man was hailed as one of the most important archaeological finds of the 1980s. But what makes this bog body so rare? When the Lindo Man died, he was healthy and in his 20s. He also had a high social status. Scientists know this because his body shows almost no evidence of having to do any hard physical labor. So then the question became, why had a prominent member of society been strangled, suffered blunt force trauma in the neck wound, and discarded in the bog? We're not really sure. He was thrown into the swamp face down sometime between the year 2 BC and 119 AD. He is currently preserved and on display at the British Museum. But researchers can't say for sure why this individual was killed in such a brutal manner. Archaeologists have speculated that it could have been ritualistic, but the truth is, nobody really knows. He may be evidence of an early homicide.
Stolen Viking treasure. In 2015, metal detectorists George Powell and Leighton Davies discovered a large Viking treasure hoard on privately owned land in Leominster, England. The trove consisted of 300 Anglo-Saxon coins and jewelry dating back between the 5th and 9th centuries. Its value is estimated at up to $16,230,000. Because they didn't actually have permission from the landowner to search the property, the duo kept quiet about their discovery. They also wanted to cash in on the goods, which would have automatically become property of the Crown under the Treasure Act if the pair had reported the stash. While finders often receive a reward for turning over artifacts, the payout is nowhere near the actual value of the items. But violating the Treasure Act comes with heavy penalties, and Powell and Davies' greed eventually caught up with them. They tried to covertly sell some of the coins to private dealers, who reported the pair to the authorities. Both men received prison sentences of 8 to 10 years. Not worth it if you ask me. Sadly, while all the jewelry and a gold ingot were recovered, only 30 of the coins were ever found. The judge condemned them at their sentencing for robbing society of the opportunity to enjoy and admire the artifacts, and of cheating the landowner out of his deserved reward.
A Roman crucifixion. While excavating at a Roman settlement in Cambridgeshire, England in 2017, archaeologists found evidence of a crucifixion in the form of an ankle bone with a nail driven through the heel. The 1900-year-old skeleton belongs to a man who died between the ages of 25 and 35 years old. He was laid to rest with his arms crossed over his chest in one of 5 cemeteries that have been found near an ancient Roman settlement in Fenstanton. The burial seemed pretty ordinary at first. Field archaeologists bagged the bones without even noticing the nail through the man's heel. After taking a closer look, however, experts noticed the nail, which they recently described as the best physical evidence of a Roman crucifixion ever found. Project manager David Ingham told reporters that nothing quite like it has ever been found, so nobody was looking for the nail at first. In other words, it's understandable that it went unnoticed. It's true that crucifixion nails are a rare archaeological find, mainly because the punishment was often carried out using rope, and because the victims rarely received a proper burial. Scientists examined the skeleton in detail and ruled out other possibilities, concluding that the Fenstanton man was, indeed, most likely crucified. He is a rare example of someone not only being crucified with nails rather than rope, but of a crucifixion victim being afforded a respectable burial. Nobody knows who he was or why he was put to death, although the practice was typically reserved for lower-class people, slaves, and rebels. There are only 4 known discoveries bearing physical evidence of crucifixion worldwide, and at least one of them is questionable in terms of its authenticity, making the Fenstanton Man one of the most remarkable archaeological finds from Roman England to date. Mass child sacrifice. Archaeologists have discovered what very well could be the largest single incident of mass child sacrifice anywhere in the world. The discovery was made in Peru, with over 140 children and 200 young llamas being ritually sacrificed about 550 years ago. It happened on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean at the time of the Chimu Empire. The scientific team behind the discovery was led by Gabriel Prieto of the Universidad Nacional de Trujillo. And while there have been plenty of incidents of human sacrifice throughout the world, especially in the Americas with the Aztec and the Maya, it was the Chimu civilization who really pushed things to the extreme. 140 may not sound like a lot in the grand scheme of things, but it's the equivalent of 4 or 5 classrooms of children massacred all at once. Horrific. And to make matters worse, nobody seems to have any idea why it happened. We know that at the peak of the Chimu Empire, they controlled over 600 miles of territory along the Pacific coast. We also know that their capital was Chan Chan, one of the largest cities in the Americas at the time. When it comes to South America, the only empire larger than the Chimu was the Inca, who actually put an end to these people in the year 1475. The children were all sacrificed sometime between the years 1400 and 1450, right at the end of the Chimu's long reign. It could have been that the kids were sacrificed as some desperate plea to an obscure god to save them from annihilation. We just don't know. The sacrifices were especially brutal, and researchers are trying to understand what led them to do this with their most precious members of society. A Peruvian mummy. Archaeologists working in Peru have discovered yet another exceptionally well-preserved mummy. This time the mummy is a little terrifying. It seems to have been in distress at the time it died. It was discovered bound with ropes, its hands covering its face, and its mouth twisted in a final expression of pain. They found the mummy inside an underground structure at the bottom of a staircase. As far as the experts can gather, the mummy was killed about 800 years ago by people from a pre-Inca culture living in Cajamarquilla. When I say the mummy was bound in rope, it was literally bound completely in rope. It was like somebody caught the person in a giant net. The individual was also in the fetal position, as if they died curled over themselves and covering their face. But researchers believe the position and the rope was possibly part of a funeral custom practiced by whoever lived here. The researchers also found marine mollusks outside the tomb, suggesting there was some kind of event or activity after the body was put inside. And then later, the descendants of the mummified individual or other members of the culture kept coming back and putting food offerings like mollusks outside the tomb's entrance. So what at first glance looks terrifying might have been quite natural. The brewer's tomb. One of the rarest tombs ever discovered in Egypt belonged to an ancient brewer from 3,000 years ago. It was an archaeological team from Japan that found the brewer's tomb in 2014 on the west bank of the Nile, belonging to a man named Khonso Im Heb. He was the head of granaries for a group of beer-drinking worshippers of the Egyptian goddess Mut. According to National Geographic, the excavations began in El Kokha after the area was cleared of all modern houses in 2007. Archaeologists were finally able to look for tombs and other things from antiquity. It was as they were clearing tomb TT47 that they found the brewer, the walls of his burial chamber decorated in colorful paintings. These paintings show interactions between the brewer and his family, as well as depictions of rituals centering around beer. The beer cult basically drank copious amounts of beer and worshipped their goddess. It was, in all likelihood, just one great big party. And now for number 4. But first, I want to give a big shout out to Carrie Aubrey and Melissa Watson. Thanks so much for spending time with us. If you are new here, welcome. And don't forget to subscribe and join the Origins Explained family.
SS Central America Hoard. Nicknamed the Ship of Gold, the SS Central America steamer sank off the South Carolina coast during a hurricane in 1857. It was en route from Panama to New York City when it went down, taking thousands of pounds of gold and 425 people with it to the bottom of the ocean. Eager to find the wreck, treasure hunter Tommy Thompson convinced 161 investors to fund an expedition during the 1980s. They ponied up $12.7 million for the project. In 1988, Thompson and his crew discovered the wreck 8,000 feet below the water's surface. The following year, they recovered around 3 tons of gold coins valued at over $50 million. A slew of lawsuits ensued until finally, a decade later, the team was awarded a 92% share of the wreck. But the lawsuits continued as numerous investors and companies claimed that Thompson and his crew cheated them out of millions of dollars. In 2012, Thompson failed to appear in court and went into hiding with his girlfriend. They lived in a hotel for the next 3 years, keeping a low profile while paying all their expenses in cash to avoid being traceable. The authorities eventually caught up with the couple and put Thompson in federal prison while the case gets sorted out. He claims that he doesn't know where the treasure is and has stubbornly stuck to this story while languishing behind bars for the past 6 years. Although Thompson has some supporters, the judge refuses to buy his story and has continuously demanded answers. Whether or not the disgraced explorer will eventually crack remains to be seen.
Ancient gaming tokens. The oldest known gaming tokens in human history have been discovered in graves from the Bronze Age. The small stones, carved in various shapes, are about 5,000 years old. They were uncovered from a burial site in Turkey at Basur Huyuk. It's as if 5,000 years from today, some highly advanced humans were to dig up the ruins of your house and find your old Monopoly tokens. The experts found 49 small stones, each one painted in a vibrant shade of green, blue, red, black, or white. They are all different shapes too, with some looking like triangles, some look like little pigs, some are circular, and some are weird globs. Some of the game pieces were even made to look like pyramids. Plus, they found 3 dice made from white shell and black stone. But now comes the big question. Just what in the world were the game pieces used for? What kind of complicated game could ancient people have come up with that involved so many different gaming tokens? Well, it's hard to say. We do know that similar pieces have been found in more recent archaeological sites in Syria and Iraq, but never whole collections. They've only ever been found as single objects, so archaeologists thought they were just counting stones. Now that all the pieces have been found together, it represents a complete set. It's like finding all the pieces to a chess game. But archaeologists still can't figure out how the game was played. All we know for sure is that people have been playing board games since ancient Mesopotamia, all the way back in 3100 BC. Ancient leather armor. In 2013, archaeologists found a nearly complete set of leather armor in a tomb in an extremely dry region of northwestern China. A team of experts from the University of Zurich recently examined the armor in detail. They determined that it was made sometime between the 6th and 8th centuries BC. It belonged to a warrior who rode a horse, and the owner died at around 30 years old. The 2,700-year-old armor originated in the Neo-Assyrian Empire, which encompassed Mesopotamia, the Levant, Egypt, and part of Anatolia. It was brought to China where it was buried in the warrior's grave near the modern-day city of Turfan. The recent analysis is helping researchers better understand the spread of military technology throughout the first millennium BC. They described the leather armor as acting like an extra layer of skin, which protected its wearer's vital organs during combat without making it difficult for the fighter to move. Armor was extremely valuable at the time because the materials were expensive and it was a lot of work to make. Wearing it was a privilege reserved for the elite, and warriors were rarely buried with it. But the use of leather, bronze, and iron made it more affordable and easier to get, enabling large ancient armies to gear up for battle. Ordinary soldiers of lower social rankings were able to fight efficiently, and as this discovery shows, they were even sometimes laid to rest with their armor. Desert cemetery. In the middle of an inhospitable desert in China, hundreds of amazingly intact mummies were discovered back in the 1990s. These mummies were found buried in boats 4,000 years ago during the Bronze Age. Ever since they were found, the identities of the mummies and where they came from has stumped archaeologists. But a new study has revealed some interesting information. Scientists sequenced the genomes of 13 mummies, discovering that they were descendants of hunter-gatherers from the Ice Age. But they still haven't been able to figure out why they buried their mummies in boats, as this wasn't done anywhere else in the region. The only other culture we know about that practiced burying their dead in boats were the Vikings, thousands of miles away from these people and thousands of years after they were already gone. And to make matters even more mysterious, the mummies were covered in cattle hides at the time of death and placed in the boats with oars at their heads. Keep in mind that these were desert people, a group that wasn't living anywhere near the open ocean. Why they would bury their dead in boats is one of the strangest enigmas in Chinese archaeology that nobody has ever been able to figure out. What is your guess? Let me know in the comments below. 1853 slave tag. Archaeology magazine has named the discovery of a slave tag at the College of Charleston one of the top 10 finds of 2021. The tag, which comes from 1853, was discovered by faculty and students at the college, literally on the college grounds. But this is one discovery with a seriously dark shadow over it. Tags like these were used during the 18th century up until 1865 as a kind of permit showing that the enslaved person wearing the tag was registered by the slaveholder with the city. The tags were given to the slaves when they were loaned to somebody else as proof of original ownership. This was one of the darkest times in the history of America, making the discovery a little tricky to talk about. Marley Brown, an editor with Archaeology magazine, said that they included the discovery in their top 10 because it's a reminder of an individual who may have otherwise been lost to time and to the brutal dehumanizing system that was enslavement. We may not know who wore the tag, but at least by finding and preserving the history, we can keep this mysterious individual's memory alive. Archaeologists and historians can also help educate the public on the terrors that afflicted America for hundreds of years. A Viking sword. Archaeologists have found plenty of old Viking weapons before, but now they have found something rare and unique. In 2015, the Mayback Viking burial was discovered and excavated in Orkney, Scotland. It dates back about 1,200 years, to the heyday of Viking exploration. Inside the burial was a trove of treasures and goods from the Viking era, including one particularly interesting sword. The sword is a Peterson Type D sword, one of the heaviest weapons ever forged by the Vikings. Andrew Morrison, an archaeological expert, says there have only been about 30 of these blades found from the old Viking world. Half of them have been discovered in Norway, with the rest being found randomly in places like Russia, Slovakia, and even Dublin. The thing that's so special about a Peterson Type D sword is that the person who wielded it must have been insanely strong. These were huge swords, crafted in the 9th century to do maximum damage. If you wanted to literally cleave your enemy in half, this would have been the blade to do it with. It required a huge hilt for stabilization, but the end result was a devastating weapon. We don't know much about the man who was found with the blade resting on his 1,000-year-old remains, other than that he must have been a ferocious warrior.
Uncirculated Great Depression coins. In 2003, a 75-year-old woman named Joan Langbord found 10 coins inside a safety deposit box belonging to her family. Because she had worked at her late father's jewelry store in Philadelphia nearly all her life, she had enough knowledge of coins to suspect that they were 1933 double eagles. The double eagle is famous for being one of the rarest and most beautiful American coins. Designed by sculptor Augustus St. Gaudens, the coin features Lady Liberty on one side and a bald eagle on the other. Each of the 445,500 double eagles that were minted in 1933 were valued at $20, but they were never circulated, which made them even more valuable over time. During the Great Depression, the U.S. was plagued by poverty, unemployment, homelessness, and a deep distrust for banks. As a result, people began to hoard gold. This prompted then-President Franklin D. Roosevelt to pull all gold coins from circulation, and the double eagle was consequently never released into public hands. Most of the coins were sealed away in the basement of the U.S. Mint. The agency held onto 500 of them, while 2 of the coins were sent to the Smithsonian. The rest were supposed to be melted down into gold bars. But a cashier smuggled an unknown amount of the coins out of the Mint's possession and into the hands of private collectors. A Secret Service investigation had actually traced 10 of the double eagles to Joan Langford's father, Israel Scott, but they failed to retrieve the coins at the time. Langford assumed that her father legally owned the currency and took it to the mint for authentication. She hoped to sell the coins, which were worth a whopping $40 million. To her surprise, however, the mint deemed the double eagles to be stolen government property and confiscated them from Langford. Langford sued the mint, the Treasury, and various federal officials in 2006. She claimed that there was a narrow window of time during which her father could have purchased the coins legally. Unfortunately, the verdict ruled against her, and the coins remained in the government's possession.
Blair Athol Man. Around 1,500 years ago, a 45-year-old man died and was buried in the Scottish Highlands. Construction workers discovered his skeleton in 1985 and called the police, who summoned archaeologists to the scene. Experts dated the remains to sometime between 400 and 600 AD, and they learned a few other interesting things about him as well. Nicknamed the Blair Athol Man after his final resting place, he spent the last 5 to 10 years of his life subsisting on pork, freshwater fish, and waterfowl. He ate a similar diet to others who lived in the area at the time, initially leading researchers to believe that he was a local. But a recent analysis detected an unusually high amount of sulfur in his remains compared to others in the area, indicating that the Blair Athol Man wasn't a local after all. He likely spent a good portion of his life along Scotland's western coast, and probably arrived in the Highlands shortly before he died. Scientists think that he may have grown up in one of the Hebrides Islands, or that he might have even come from Ireland. This and other recent discoveries add to a growing body of evidence that people traveled great distances throughout Scotland during the early medieval period. Researcher Kate Britton, who co-authored a study on the topic, told journalists that these types of movements may have not been uncommon. She also explained that both men and women migrated between coasts and elsewhere, and that they probably had various reasons for making these journeys. Little else is known about the Blair Athol Man despite the new findings about his travels. He may have been a member of the Picts, an indigenous Celtic group of people who lived in modern-day eastern and northeastern Scotland during ancient times. Britton said that he was born in a remote area that wasn't yet a part of Pictish territory, yet he migrated to their region and was buried according to their funerary customs. The recent study was sparked by a local fascination with the Blair Athol Man and a desire to know more about his life. Perhaps the strong public interest in his story will inspire more investigations. Vampire Child. Archaeologists have been left both baffled and horrified by the remains of a 10-year-old child found buried at an ancient Roman cemetery in Italy. This particular cemetery is believed to have been used strictly for burying people who may have possessed supernatural powers. This child was buried with a stone put in its mouth, likely as part of a funeral designed to stop the kid from rising beyond the grave. In other words, the local people thought the child was a vampire. Professor David Soren, one of the experts who's been excavating the mass burial site since back in the 1980s, described the child's burial as eerie and weird, going on to say that he's never seen anything like it before. The cemetery is called La Necropoli dei Bambini in Italian, which translates roughly to the cemetery of children. Experts have been able to date the site back to 400 AD, to a massive malaria outbreak that mainly killed babies and small children. Up until the discovery of this vampire child, the oldest person found buried here was a 3-year-old girl. But the supposed vampire wasn't the only peculiar burial here. Previous excavations revealed the bones of both infants and toddlers buried alongside objects frequently associated with witchcraft. These objects include creepy things straight out of a fantasy book, such as toad bones, raven talons, and even bronze cauldrons filled with the remains of sacrificed puppies. One child was even found buried with stones tied around her hands and feet. Roman villa beneath a farmer's field. In England, archaeologists unearthed the first Roman mosaic of its kind in the United Kingdom. They discovered the mosaic, part of a Roman villa complex, beneath a farmer's field in Rutland. The mosaic is the first of its kind in the UK to show scenes from the famous epic poem The Iliad, written by Homer. It's also one of only a handful of such mosaics that have been found across mainland Europe. Archaeologists are saying it is now the most remarkable Roman piece of ancient artwork that's been found in Britain. It shows the part of the poem involving the Greek hero Achilles, the guy you might remember from the movie Troy, played by Brad Pitt. The mosaic shows Achilles and his final battle with Hector at the very end of the Trojan War. Almost as remarkable as the mosaic itself is the fact that it was discovered by accident by the son of the landowner. He got in touch with archaeologists from the University of Leicester, and they went out to his field to excavate the villa and see what else they could find. This incredible discovery may lead to more. So far, they believe the villa was probably occupied by a very wealthy person in the latter part of the Roman era. This individual had probably been a fan of classical literature to have such a scene made part of his home. An ancient gemstone. While sifting through the rubble of the Holy Temple Mount in Jerusalem, archaeologists discovered a rare and unique amethyst gemstone that was used during the Second Temple period. The excavations were being carried out near the Western Wall by the city of David. This small oval stone was used 2,000 years ago, probably as a ring. Because this small gem was found amongst heaps of trash in the ruins of a drainage canal, archaeologists have come up with a pretty unique theory. Eli Shukran of the Israel Antiquities Authority believes the gem was worn on somebody's finger as a ring and used as a seal for stamping official documents. It likely slipped off its owner's finger and became lost in the drainage system for the past 2,000 years. It's like if you lost your wedding ring and then an archaeologist found it in the sewer a few thousand years from now. It's one of the oldest and most fascinating lost and found cases ever. The Hoxne Hoard. Eric Laws was searching his property in Suffolk, England for a lost hammer back in 1992, when he discovered the largest ever cache of Roman treasure ever found in Britain. Known as the Hoxne Hoard, it contained at least 60 pounds of silver and gold objects, which archaeologists removed from the site by the shovelful. The artifacts include over 15,000 Roman coins, 200 gold items, and dozens of silver spoons. Laws and the landowner received generous seven-figure payouts for the find, which helped experts glean insight into Britain's turbulent separation from the Roman Empire around 410 AD. British Roman subjects had lost the empire's protection during the late 4th century, sparking a period of mass hoarding among citizens in an effort to protect their valuables from enemy raids. Researchers originally assumed that the Hoxne Hoard had been buried around that time, but they found out that the coins continued to circulate for decades after the empire fell. Nearly all the coins are clipped by up to a third, with the trimmings likely used to make imitation coins. According to archaeologist Peter Guest, this suggests that the Roman emperor was no longer supplying Britain with currency. Archaeologist Catherine Johns speculated that the family who owned the Hoxne Hoard attached sentimental value to its items and even used them before carefully burying them, indicating that the items were not hidden under duress like they would be during a time of turmoil. Regardless of when the Hoxne Hoard was buried, which remains disputed to this day, experts agree on one thing. It's one of the most valuable Roman-era treasure collections ever found in Britain. Golden-tongued mummies. Archaeologists recently discovered two intriguing tombs at the El Banassa site, also known as Oxyrhynchus, in what was once Upper Egypt. They dated the burials to sometime between 688 and 525 BC, during Egypt's 26th dynasty. The era is also known as the Site period and is named after Sais, which was the empire's capital city at the time. One of the burials consisted of a large limestone sarcophagus with a lid shaped like a woman. Unfortunately, the tomb was raided at some point during antiquity, so some things were missing by the time modern experts found it. Luckily, they discovered another ancient tomb nearby, which remained untouched. Inside it was a sarcophagus belonging to a man, along with over 200 artifacts, including amulets, beads, and figurines. Both mummies had golden tongues. You may be surprised to learn that it wasn't the first time that scientists discovered golden-tongued mummies. Earlier this year, a team unearthed 16 2,000-year-old burials containing poorly preserved mummies with gold foil amulets shaped like tongues in their mouths. The tongues were meant to enable people who had passed on to speak directly to Osiris, the god of the underworld and the judge of the dead. These particular discoveries were made in northern Egypt at the Tap Osiris Magna Temple in Alexandria. which isn't exactly near the more recently discovered Golden Tongue mummies, showing that the tradition was widespread. The sacred Mayan pool. It was in the middle of the first millennium AD that the Maya civilization was being decimated by drought. A series of droughts caused food to become scarce. It forced people to move out of the great Maya cities and seek refuge elsewhere, and it ultimately led to the collapse of this ancient civilization. According to a new discovery, the Maya knew exactly what was happening and desperately beseeched their gods for rain by conducting horrifying ritual sacrifices. Researchers have found evidence of what they've called a drought cult at the ancient site of Cara Blanca in Belize. The evidence consists of a Maya shrine, human remains, and other offerings at the bottom of a subterranean pool. The team of researchers believe the Maya journeyed to what they believed was a sacred pool specifically to purify themselves and leave offerings to the god of rain Chak to stop the drought. Researchers found offerings at the site from earlier periods, though these offerings were pretty bare bones. But later, near the end of the Maya lifespan, the offerings became extreme. People were sacrificing human lives, leaving behind their most precious valuables, and really putting out all the stops in a desperate attempt to get some rain. To understand why the Maya people were so desperate, keep in mind that they experienced decades and decades of heavy rainfall leading to a boom in their population. But the rainfall stopped in the year 660 AD. The rain was then replaced by drought, with the drought going on for so long that almost all their cities had collapsed by the year 800. Near the end was when the drought cult surfaced, massacring people and dumping their bodies in cenotes to appease the gods. But as we all know, it didn't quite work. A rare silver coin. Leo Krutokop, an 11-year-old girl, was taking part in the Temple Mount sifting project in Israel when she came across an unusual object. She and her family were sifting through discarded debris taken away from one of the holiest places in all of Jerusalem when the girl spotted the shiny object. It turned out to be an extremely rare coin from when Rome occupied Judea over 2,000 years ago. The little girl handed the coin over to professionals with the Israel Antiquities Authority. They cleaned the coin up and did a bit of research, discovering that the silver coin had probably come from the silver reserves that were kept at the Second Temple on the Temple Mount, before it was destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 AD. The coin had probably been minted by one of the priests at the temple, as it was inscribed with Hebrew letters that read, "Second Year." This reference was probably to the second year of the Jewish revolt in either 67 or 68 AD, when the Jews were fighting back against their Roman oppressors. The revolt wasn't a big success. It was the first of 3 major rebellions in which the Jewish people tried desperately to get rid of the Romans and to have their own unified Judea. But still, the coin is an amazing glimpse into the turbulent past of what is today Israel. The oldest string instrument. Here's yet another amazing discovery from Scotland, this time from the Isle of Skye. And rather than a brutal warrior's weapon used to carve people in two, this time we're dealing with a musical instrument. The instrument may have once been used by a peaceful bard, or maybe not. All archaeologists know is that they've uncovered the earliest stringed instrument ever found in Western Europe. Not much of it is left, just a single broken piece of wood. The wood is burnt, in terrible shape, and it was found sitting on the floor of a cave. And while most people probably wouldn't have even recognized it as anything important, archaeologists were able to identify it as part of the bridge of a lyre, one that was used over 2,300 years ago. Musical archaeologist Graham Lawson says the discovery has marked a significant change in musical history. Finding a stringed instrument in a Scottish cave has pushed the history of complex music back over 1,000 years. Because the lyre was almost exclusively used for song and poetry, it's a much more interesting find than something like a flute made of bird bone 10,000 years ago. And while you might think there have been older stringed instruments found in Rome or ancient Greece, that's not the case. The only older lyres found in the world came from Iraq, from 5,000 years ago. This one was built by the Celts, who apparently mastered string music before the Romans ever even occupied Britain. Thanks for watching! What do you think is the most interesting amongst these rare discoveries? Ancient gemstones, rare love letters, Let me know in the comments below, and remember to hit that subscribe button and come back soon for more amazing videos. Bye!